A whirlwind romance that lasted only 5 days in Los Angeles ended not with a gentle goodbye, but with one of the most disturbing crime scenes investigators had ever witnessed. On September 12, 2023, when police finally gained entry to a luxury apartment in Los Angeles, they discovered 31-year-old model Melissa Mooney's body inside her own refrigerator, bound, gagged, and bearing signs of what appeared to be prolonged torture. The suspect was Magnus Humphrey, a 43-year-old man from Minnesota with a violent criminal history whom Melissa had met just 5 days before her disappearance. If you want to follow the developments in this case and learn more about other true crime stories that have shocked communities across America, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Melissa Mooney was described by those who knew her as a knockout beauty with big dreams and an incredible work ethic. At 31 years old, she was juggling 3 part-time jobs to make ends meet in the expensive city of Los Angeles. She worked as a part-time model, leveraging her striking looks for photo shoots and promotional events. She also held a position as a part-time real estate agent, helping clients navigate the competitive Los Angeles housing market. Additionally, she worked as an escort, a choice she made to supplement her income in one of America's most expensive cities. Friends and family remember her as hard-working and ambitious someone who was determined to build a better life for herself. She had just moved into her new apartment about a month before the events that would lead to her tragic death. In early September 2023, Magnus Humphrey traveled from his home in Minnesota to Los Angeles to visit his father and brother. During this visit, he was introduced to Melissa Mooney through a mutual friend named Kirsten Doss at a bar in Santa Monica. According to later accounts, the two hit it off immediately and used cocaine together during their first meeting. What followed was an intense whirlwind romance that moved at breakneck speed. Magnus quickly moved into Melissa's apartment, essentially taking up residence there almost immediately after they met. To outside observers, the relationship appeared to escalate with alarming velocity, far faster than what would typically be considered normal or healthy. From the very beginning, there were warning signs that should have raised concerns. Multiple witnesses later reported that Magnus displayed possessive behavior toward Melissa almost immediately. Witnesses reported that he would openly call her, "That's my girl," and "That's my woman," language that suggested he viewed her as property rather than as an equal partner. Friends noted that Melissa seemed out of Magnus's league, in many ways leading some to speculate about what drew her into this relationship. Some theorized she may have been caught up in the intensity of the moment, possibly influenced by drug use, or perhaps hoping that Magnus might provide financial support or stability. The relationship that had begun with such intensity soon revealed underlying tensions, particularly around financial matters. As an escort, Melissa was accustomed to being compensated for her time and companionship. With Magnus staying at her apartment around the clock, essentially monopolizing her time and preventing her from working, she began to feel the financial strain. Text messages recovered by investigators showed that Melissa reached out to her friend Kirsten Doss, expressing difficulty in asking Magnus for money. Kirsten suggested that Melissa ask him for a $500 Best Buy gift card as a way to request compensation. However, Melissa's response was telling and troubling. She simply wrote back, "He doesn't have it," indicating that Magnus lacked the financial resources she had hoped for. September 7, 2023, marked the last day anyone saw Melissa Mooney alive. On this day, text messages show that Melissa sent Magnus 2 shopping links. One was for pots and pans on Amazon, and another was for kitchen appliances, including a toaster oven. These were mundane, everyday items, the kind of basic household goods that any couple setting up a life together might purchase. There was nothing in these requests that suggested any kind of confrontation or crisis was imminent. Yet after Melissa sent these messages requesting these ordinary items, she vanished. No one heard from her again, and she was never seen alive by anyone outside that apartment. When Melissa failed to show up to collect some belongings on September 9th, her family immediately became concerned. This was out of character for Melissa, who typically stayed in regular contact with her loved ones. Her sister contacted the Los Angeles Police Department requesting that they perform a welfare check on Melissa. On September 10th, police officers arrived at Melissa's apartment and knocked on the door. However, without a search warrant or probable cause to believe a crime had been committed, they were unable to enter the premises. The officers left without gaining access to the apartment, not knowing what horror lay inside. As days passed with no word from Melissa, her family's concern grew into desperation. On September 12, 2023, Melissa's mother took decisive action. She contacted the management of the apartment building and obtained authorization for police to enter her daughter's unit. Armed with this permission, officers returned to the apartment that afternoon to conduct a thorough welfare check. What they discovered inside would haunt even the most seasoned investigators. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came when officers entered the kitchen. All of the perishable food items that should have been stored in the refrigerator were instead sitting out on the counter. This unusual detail immediately raised red flags. When officers approached the refrigerator and opened the door, they were confronted with a scene of unimaginable horror. Blood had begun to pool and drip from underneath the appliance, trailing across the floor. Inside the refrigerator, they found Melissa Mooney's body. The condition of Melissa's remains told a story of brutal violence. Her body had been bound and gagged using electrical cords and her own clothing. The medical examination would later reveal the extent of the trauma she had endured. Melissa had suffered broken ribs, lacerations, scratches, and bruising across her face, head, neck, and arms. Investigators believed that she had been tortured over an extended period of time before her death. Her back showed marks consistent with being whipped with a cable. Chunks of her hair had been torn from her scalp, suggesting she had been dragged or that her hair had been pulled with extreme force. Her head was bent backwards at what investigators described as an unnatural angle. The brutality of the crime scene was so severe that even veteran police officers who had seen countless crime scenes throughout their careers were visibly shaken. Their reactions were captured on body camera footage, providing a stark testament to the horror of what they had witnessed. Among the many tragic details uncovered during the investigation, perhaps none was more heartbreaking than the discovery that Melissa was 2 months pregnant at the time of her death. The medical examiner's report confirmed what made this already horrific crime even more devastating. Melissa was not just fighting for her own survival during those final hours, she was carrying new life within her. This revelation meant that the violence inflicted upon her had claimed not one victim, but 2. A child who would never take their first breath, never know their mother's love, never have the chance to experience life at all. For Melissa's family, this discovery compounded their grief in ways that are difficult to put into words. They were mourning not only the daughter and sister they had lost, but also the grandchild, niece, or nephew they would never get to meet. The investigation into Melissa's death moved quickly once her body was discovered. Forensic evidence collected from the crime scene proved crucial to identifying a suspect. DNA samples taken from Melissa's body were run through criminal databases and returned a match to Magnus Humphrey. Because Magnus had prior criminal convictions, his DNA profile was already on file in the system, making the identification swift and certain. Surveillance video from the apartment building provided additional evidence. The footage showed Magnus entering and exiting Melissa's apartment at various times. Critically, one video clip captured him disposing of a large black bag before leaving the building, getting into a vehicle driving to Long Beach, and then boarding a flight back to Minnesota. Despite this evidence, Magnus Humphrey was not immediately arrested for Melissa's murder. 5 months would pass before he was taken into custody in connection with her death. In February 2024, Magnus was arrested at his home in Minnesota on an unrelated federal warrant stemming from drug charges. It was only after this arrest that he was extradited to Los Angeles and formally charged with murder and torture in connection with Melissa Mooney's death. As prosecutors built their case, they sought to introduce evidence that would demonstrate a pattern of violent behavior. They wanted to counter any potential defense argument that Melissa's death was the result of a spontaneous emotional outburst or an isolated incident. To this end, they located a former girlfriend of Magnus Humphrey, who agreed to testify about her own experience with him. This woman provided chilling testimony about an attack that bore disturbing similarities to what happened to Melissa. The ex-girlfriend described being assaulted by Magnus for nearly 3 hours in an attack that she said felt endless and terrifying. During this assault, Magnus beat her with electrical cords, pulled out chunks of her hair, and then locked her in a closet. The parallels between this attack and what happened to Melissa were striking. Both victims were beaten with electrical cords. Both had their hair torn out. Both were confined in enclosed spaces, one in a closet and one in a refrigerator. Prosecutors argued that these similarities were not coincidental, but rather evidence of a calculated pattern of behavior, a course of conduct that demonstrated Magnus's capacity for prolonged sadistic violence. On October 16, 2025, a Los Angeles judge held a preliminary hearing to determine whether there was sufficient evidence for Magnus Humphrey to stand trial. After reviewing the evidence presented by prosecutors, including the DNA evidence surveillance footage and testimony from the ex-girlfriend, the judge ruled that there was indeed enough evidence to proceed to trial on charges of murder and torture. Magnus Humphrey, through his attorney Michael Lambros, has maintained his innocence throughout the legal proceedings. His defense attorney has characterized the evidence against him as thin and has argued that there is no proof of premeditation or intent to torture. Magnus entered a plea of not guilty to all charges and remains in custody without bail, having been deemed a danger to the community. Members of Melissa Mooney's family attended the preliminary hearing, seeking some measure of justice for their daughter, sister, and friend. The timing of the hearing was particularly painful for them as it took place just before what would have been Melissa's 34th birthday. In statements to the media, family members expressed their grief and their determination to see justice served. They spoke of Melissa as a vibrant young woman with her whole life ahead of her, someone who worked hard to achieve her dreams and who did not deserve the horrific fate that befell her. As of now, Magnus Humphrey awaits trial on charges of murder and torture. The legal process will determine his guilt or innocence based on the evidence presented in court. The case has drawn attention not only because of the brutality of the alleged crime, but also because it highlights the dangers that can lurk behind seemingly ordinary encounters. A chance meeting at a bar, a whirlwind romance that moved too fast, warning signs that may have been overlooked or dismissed, all of these elements came together in a tragedy that cost a young woman her life. This case serves as a sobering reminder of the importance of recognizing red flags in relationships, particularly possessive behavior, rapid escalation of commitment, and any signs of violence or control. It also underscores the critical role that the justice system plays in holding perpetrators accountable and providing closure to the families of victims. Every life has value, and every victim deserves justice under the law. We invite you to share your thoughts on this case in the comments below, but we ask that you base your opinions on the facts as they have been presented through official channels and court proceedings. To stay updated on this case as it moves forward through the legal system, and to learn about other true crime cases that have captured national attention, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Your engagement helps us continue bringing you detailed, fact-based coverage of cases that matter.